we are going to be talking about driving mainstream adoption in the next, driving mainstream blockchain adoption in the next half hour. And I've got a great panel to help me do this. I'm joined by Karim. He's a business and ecosystem development executive at BNB Chain. Luigi DeMeo, he's head of DeFi at Ava Labs. Michael Kong, CEO at the Fantom Foundation, and Dani Osorio, partner at Near Protocol. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. How are we?
Hey, Connor. Good to be here.
How are you?
Hi.
How's it going?
Good, very good, thank you. No complaints. Great to see you all. So, what we're going to do first, I'd like you all in 30 seconds to explain what your projects are doing to drive mainstream blockchain adoption. Sammy, we'll come to you first.
So BNB Chain is an EVM compatible chain, but it's moving to a multi-chain ecosystem, has the largest number of users among any layer one chain. And we're super focused on scaling and developing and maintaining the infrastructure to drive developers to build apps that can reach tens of millions, eventually hundreds of millions, and then eventually a billion users.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Luigi, what about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So thanks for having me. Avalanche is also, a network of blockchains that boasts an EVM compatible chain as well as custom VMs via our subnet architecture. In terms of boosting ecosystem growth and kind of how we're going to get to the next billion users, we've really seen and experienced recently the adoption of many different verticals, whether that be DeFi, NFTs, but then also on the institutional front, which these subnets allow for permissioned blockchains, which we're seeing a lot of interest in. So I think we're going to see a lot of growth in the institutional side, but then a lot of growth on retail-based apps. And we're working, acutely on improving the UX for blockchain in order to make that happen.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Michael, do you want to hop in here and tell us about what you're doing to drive mainstream blockchain adoption?
Yeah, sure. At Fantom, working really a big focus of the Fantom Foundation, which I'm the CEO of, is to work on improving the scalability and the security of blockchain technology to do with core consensus development and also middleware development. So users really care about three things, right? It's low cost transactions, fast transactions, and secure transactions. So the way that we're trying to get mainstream adoption is to basically scale out the technology as best as possible. So working on the new virtual machine middleware stack, for example, working on improvements to consensus and communication between nodes, for example, exploring different architectures around how do you process transactions asynchronously while being able to create shards or be able to divide up the network. And so that's part of it. And the other part of it is also outreach to the community, via this opportunity, for example, and via other opportunities to try and tell people about blockchains and cryptocurrencies and the benefits and what you can do with them and all the sort of use cases and some of the use cases that also haven't really been explored at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. Well, great to hear all of you and what you're doing to drive things forward. But Sammy, I'll start with you. We have seen, of course, a lot of growth in crypto over the past 18, 24 months, but relative to the global population, adoption is probably still fairly modest. Why do you think there are many people out there who haven't warmed to cryptocurrencies yet?
Yeah, I think the way to really look at it is the evolution and maturity of the underlying infrastructure at the application level, even developer adoption. So we're as you mentioned, in the really early stages. So if you look at total number of and probably better to dissect when you talk about crypto users, there's users that are trading, holding crypto, some that are doing more and more doing payments in crypto using centralized infrastructure. And there we saw massive expansion in overall total number of users in crypto in whichever way you want to measure it, especially last year, probably 4x or maybe even more. But it's still in the low millions if you look at total number, especially in decentralized apps. For centralized exchange users and stuff like that is more, but if we talk about number of users on decentralized applications, it's probably in the low millions, like really far away, especially if you want to compare with any of like the Web2 applications and these kind of things. So like there's a number of challenges here. One is like if you look at total number of developers in crypto today as a subset of the total number of web developers or whatever globally, it's still tight. So like huge amount of work to do still in terms of driving developer adoption. Number two is like around user adoption. So user adoption, like there's a lot of challenges on the infrastructure side for sure. Like all of the people here today are doing awesome work around improving like infrastructure that can really scale to support tens of millions, hundreds of millions, and then eventually like larger number of users. But even there, like we're kind of at the early stages of that journey. Like it's moving fast and for sure, like there's a lot of great progress happening. But at the end of the day, we're still like kind of at the beginning stages of that journey. Other parts is like user experience. Like I will like try to describe it like the grandmother problem. Like and not being ageist or anything like that, but like if I think about my grandmother, like she can send me messages on Facebook all the time. Like no problem for her to like send me a happy birthday or ask me to do this or whatever. But like if I have to think about her having to like receive an NFT or like set up a MetaMask, like no way she's gonna ever do it. She's just gonna tell me to do it. So like the user experience is pretty terrible today. And as like we're moving more and more into like multi-chain future is already like multi-chain reality today. And the number of chains is going to proliferate way more. So there as well, like expecting users to have to go and like add a custom RPC and do all of these kind of things that they really don't need to be doing today. Like they don't have to do that today. But there's also great improvements that are happening, like in terms of wallets and other things like that, that gives users like the Web2 experience, log in with Facebook, log in with Google, have your keys, like don't have to store a seed phrase, just like so many different designs around how that's happening, like either like just divide the private key and store it in different places or whatever. Like the actual solution design doesn't really matter, but it's more like about those fundamental issues of like user having to generate the keys and seed phrase, store it securely throughout its life from the point of generation. Can all users do that? For sure, no. Do users really have to do that? No. Like ideal scenarios, like it just happens under the hood, you know. But we're a long way away from that.
Yeah, I think your grandmother and mine have a lot in common, actually. Dani, I'd just like to apologize. I didn't give you the chance to introduce yourself. I'd just like to ask if you'd like to introduce yourself and your project and answer that question as well. Why aren't people warming to cryptocurrencies? My apologies.
No worries. I'd be happy to. I'm Dani. I work with MetaWeb and run several grants programs through the NEAR Foundation and other initiatives. I think that, I'll start with NEAR. So NEAR is another layer one. Its design is very close to ETH2 in terms of its scalability mechanism. So essentially, it's designed in what you would call one of the newer blockchain designs that already take into account how those chains are going to grow. And one of its key differentiators is that it was built with real humans in mind, right? So sometimes like it's really hard to sort of work around infrastructure that wasn't designed to be used by like regular people. And that's something that NEAR built in from the beginning. So as developers build applications, they already have functions like, you know, automatic names for people's wallets. So people can choose usernames instead of long strings. That just happens, right? Or meta transactions where developers can essentially have a gas tank and prepay all of the gas fees, which are a couple of cents for users, and users don't have to see that. So it is designed to make the developer experience much simpler, which then in turn can enable developers to build applications that are easy for their users to build. So you know, crypto didn't start talking about user, you know, the UX and actually thinking about like the end user until quite recently. And it's really hard to kind of go back and modify protocols and chains that were already built in a different kind of approach. Perhaps to focus on DeFi, perhaps to focus on something else. NEAR has always been focused on people. And I think that's really where technology has to be headed in order to be enable like mainstream adoption. I think I can tell you that the reason that we haven't really seen mainstream adoption as an industry is because it's really hard to understand crypto. It's too complicated to use anything on crypto. And honestly, I don't think that enough things of value have been built that are compelling enough to drive billions of people to like really learn this huge amount of information and overcome this very tall barrier of entry in order to enter the space. So the people who have jumped in are the people who figured out that they could make money trading, and the people who figured out they could make money with, NFTs. And they, they went through like 10-hour tutorials to figure out how to, download browsers and get on there, because that was their incentive. But for the rest of the world, who's perhaps not necessarily looking to do that, then I think that the technology has to adapt to the people rather than expecting people to adapt to the technology.
That's a very eloquent way of putting it, I think. And I'll come to you next, Luigi. I saw a MasterCard executive recently say that blockchain technology, and to an extent, I guess, crypto, needs to be invisible to succeed. And I guess my question is, and that would mean, of course, that people wouldn't really notice that they're using it. Do you think this is achievable?
So that's a phenomenal question. I think what's meant by that, frankly, is that, we have a Web2 experience that many of us are used to. And I don't think it's palatable to expect people to go backwards in terms of user experience over time. I don't think anybody expects that. With that said, scalable chains are maybe a year and a half old, if even. Bridges are less than a year old. So just the infrastructure pieces of going cross-chain to chains that can scale is very young. And we don't really have the use cases today that are interesting enough, I think, for billions and billions of people. The first real use case was probably DeFi in a big way, other than Bitcoin as a reserve. And that's actually very interesting long-term in terms of the fact that it allows you to have peer-to-peer finance in a way that you can't do without crypto. So I think that got people intrigued, excited. And then in order to speed up adoption, many different games are played to kind of advance that adoption. Now, I think where DeFi can add a lot of value going forward is really being this new market infrastructure that takes the power away from certain centralized entities and puts it back into the people's hands. So I think we'll see that. But just kind of getting back to your original point in terms of like, are we going to obfuscate all this away? I do think there is a point where we can do that. I do think there is a point where it's going to matter for certain users, but that's only for certain users of the actual chains. And it's also important to distinguish that not everything will need to be on chain. I think that's something that a lot of people forget to mention sometimes, but for only certain use cases, you'll need to be on chain and where the actual technology adds value. And then the other part that we really need to figure out and really spend a lot of time thinking through is like this thing that's called a token. What is it? Is it actually an advancement in terms of something that transfers value? And how do we structure those? Because right now, most of them have not been structured in a way that has accrued a ton of value.
Michael, your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I largely agree with what the other panelists have said very well. On the one hand, it's a technology problem. On the other hand, it's kind of like a user experience, kind of like marketing problem to do with like crypto. So like on the technology side, which kind of relates to user experience as well. As I mentioned before, that technology right now for blockchains, it cannot scale to the amount of like internet users that exists. And I think when we reach peak adoption, it will be when the number of like users for blockchain technologies matches like the number of users that use the internet. Because I see no reason why that can't happen so long as the technology is able to scale. So, as other people on the panel have mentioned, it's still very early days. The technology hasn't been around for that long. If you think about when Bitcoin was first launched, it was only about 13 years ago. So there's a lot of development being done by a variety of different projects in order to solve a lot of these scalability options, scalability problems, which a very big problem, a very challenging problem, but I think ultimately a solvable problem in very creative and intelligent ways. The other issue is to do with like kind of like, getting people used to using like blockchain technologies. And, to some extent, like I think the user experience will get better over time where, there'll be less and less interaction or less and less knowledge required of the underlying chain in order to use that technology. But at the same time, I think people will learn to use blockchain technologies going forward. Because if you kind of like look at old videos of like people when they start like when they were first learning about the internet, it's quite fascinating. You know, people go on talk shows and be like, oh, let's talk about this new thing called the internet. What is it?
Yes.
You know, it's a bit strange, right? Like, oh, browsers. Like what are browsers? How do you interact with browsers? What's a keypad, right? And like a lot of people were finding this technology as being like very weird and very strange. But nowadays, you know, billions of people, you know, logging into a web browser and you know, going onto Google or going to different websites and, you know, typing on a keyboard is like second nature. And I think to a large extent that will also happen as well. You know, people will get used to, for example, like using MetaMask or using other wallets and being able to interact with chains. And even though right now it's kind of weird, you know, creating wallets, submitting transactions and that sort of thing, I think to a large degree, people are going to get used to that sort of behavior. And it's just a matter of time. It's just a matter of adoption. It's just a matter of like growing over time, improving the technology, getting more outreach and that sort of thing, because the number of crypto users has gone up, you know, quite a lot year after year after year, even during periods of quote unquote bear markets. You know, more people use ETH, for example, in 2018 than they did in 2017. And I think a lot of people are surprised when they hear that, but that's a true fact. It's true. And so I think the adoption is just going to keep going over time. So I'm pretty optimistic about the future.
Thank you very much. Now we're in the second half of our panel. If you've got any questions, if you're watching on YouTube or in the metaverse, get in touch. Get in touch on Discord or put a comment in the YouTube channel, which I'm keeping an eye on. Now, in the second half of this panel, I'm going to hold you all to some quick fire answers, if that's okay. I want to hear from all of you just to make sure that we get everybody in. So let's go on to our next question. And I'm going to start with Dani now. And I'd like to ask you, what are some of the things that businesses can achieve using blockchain technology that they can't in the real world?
I think the main thing they can achieve, and Ilya, Near's co-founder, has spoken about this a lot, is protecting people. And I think that is an ethical responsibility that as a company you have. And using smart contracts in blockchain tech, you can establish the social contracts that have been pretty much just a handshake with consumers so far, and later down the line they change. And smart contracts ensure that initial idea of protection for consumers is always in place. An example of that is Facebook, who first told us they were never going to sell our data, and everyone signed up, and then they changed their mind, right? If that had been, done through smart contracts, then they would have said, look, we can never sell your data because your data does not belong to us, it belongs to you. Right. And then we would have never gotten to a point where they would have said, hey, now we're just going to change our mind. They would have had to renegotiate that contract with their users by saying, hey, what if we advertise to you? Are you open to maybe doing some sort of like ZK verification on data in your pod? And then we can advertise and share revenue. That could have been the proposed model that came through, right? Instead of just like we're flipping a switch and, what we said before, it doesn't matter. Or all the, similarly data breaches that are happening that consumers have no control over because their data doesn't belong to them. It belongs to some repository, some database. Someone else is charged with protecting their data. I think companies do, for the most part, intend to be good citizens and actually do right by their consumers. And, a lot of them are hacked, right? Like GitHub went through a big data hack just a couple of weeks ago. And it was a very, large attack that took a lot of consumer data with it. So I think that ultimately, the question you're asking is very important because blockchain technology does have to do something better than current technology in order to thrive. And I think at the end of the day, that's really going to be one of its key driving characteristics.
Thank you. And Sammy, I'll come to you with that same question. And I'll also throw in the fact that some critics often describe blockchains as a solution in search of a problem. Are they right?
I think to some extent, yes. But to answer the first bit of the question, I think it's really about like this new infrastructure that allows all types of businesses, like a wide variety of businesses, to redesign and re-architect the way that they're doing things. So if you look at gaming businesses, for example, they're able to create new types of game economies through this infrastructure that wasn't really possible before. In games, you had these kind of closed economies, and there was also certain trust assumptions that players of the games that are investing a lot of time and emotion, money, all of these kind of things, and rules could be rewritten because there's a centralized owner, the game developer, the game publisher, that can rewrite the rules of how these marketplaces work or how these games work. And it's happened. It's not theoretical. It's happened multiple times. So now you have like this kind of closed loop economies that today have the opportunity to be redesigned and have completely new game economies, new game economics that allow players to be able to trade game assets in different ways and have like completely different ways of how these kind of like game economies are designed. And it's not only within games, it's extends to financial services, even like enterprise and corporate markets, where you have today a lot of like a consortium for industries that have been doing kind of expensive business processes, especially around AML, KYC, and like compliance heavy industries that today can use this type of shared infrastructure to have a privacy compliant AML KYC, but instead of all of the industry participants having to incur that same cost, they have the shared infrastructure in which they're able to achieve like cost savings as well as other types of benefits as well. So I think it's really about like having this new infrastructure to redesign how many different industries have been doing things.
Thank you very much. I've got a comment here from Pierre, who's watching on YouTube. Very optimistic on this. Good luck. This generation will not know how to utilize 90% of Web3 unless the UX becomes extremely user-friendly, and a majority of platforms and most developers will not make it that far. Luigi, what do you think of that?
Yeah, I mean, this is a common remark, and I think this is pretty rational remark. And you know, what I'd say is, like I said before, the first real use cases of blockchain emerged like 2 years ago, maybe less, with DeFi. And you know, we've already seen a massive improvement in terms of UX from those times. I remember, you know, the only way to swap assets being shapeshift, frankly. And you know, now you have Uniswap and all these different applications that allow you to seamlessly swap assets. That's not to say that what we have now is perfect. It is, I think, not overly complicated to obfuscate a lot of the complexity around Web3. I don't think that's the issue at hand. It's the trade-off in obfuscating a lot of it, right? How much do you want to go back to, you know, trusting everybody? And the more you do that, usually the more you kind of end up with a better UX. So like Coinbase's new wallet that they announced with this MPC type technology where you share a key with them. Sure, this is a much better UX for the user, right? Because they'll be able to, you know, sort of share security with somebody. And if they lose their keys, somebody else has access to them. And so there will be options for users that want those things. And I think that's perfectly reasonable, and that's going to happen.
And Michael, I'm going to come to you now. And my question is, blockchain experts in high demand. And of course, many companies that are interested in blockchain technology will need some help to get their ideas for goods and services off the ground. Is a challenge with achieving mainstream adoption that many mainstream like Web2 companies are struggling to get the expertise they need?
I definitely think that is part of it, because you know, as other people on the panel have mentioned, the technology is so new, right? Like literally, like DeFi was only invented or only really got started like just over 2 years ago, and the amount of like change and innovation and like new products we've seen coming out has been absolutely amazing. But there's still, but because the industry is still new, there's still like a lot of people who don't really know how to write like smart contracts, or know how to build like blockchain-based applications, or know how to like connect to like the rest of the stack, you know, using like RPC nodes and other like such infrastructure services. And I think part of it is also that, you know, when you write smart contracts, it's like mission critical software, right? Because if you get a bug wrong, even if you get like a single line wrong in your code, you know, it can have devastating consequences when, you know, millions or billions of dollars are stored in those smart contracts worth of digital assets, or they're transacted, you know, across the smart contract. And so the level of skill required to be a great smart contract developer who knows all the like the pitfalls and all the security issues to do with programming smart contracts is very, very high. And it's also an issue in terms of the programming language itself. So like many smart contract people, know how to build in Solidity, right? Like that's the number one programming smart contract language that's out there, or the most popular one. But Solidity itself has a lot of like issues that like are really just unique to Solidity because of the language design. So for example, like you can like easily like have an unbounded loop, right? You can easily like have a case where you think you're going to loop up to a certain number in your code, but instead it kind of like overflows and resets to 0, and you just get stuck in an infinite loop, and basically like your transaction fails, right? And so I think over time, there are more smart contract developers are coming to the market. There's more people learning about it. I think it's just a matter of time that as the industry grows, you're going to see more growth in the amount of people who can do this sort of work as well.
Yeah. Okay. So we're going to do something different for this last question. This is Bagel, my hamster. I'm going to give you 30 seconds to each answer this question. And when your time runs out, you will see Bagel. So we can get all of you to chat one more time before our panel ends. So we'll go to Dani first. And for this question, we're going to imagine that we've arrived and mainstream adoption here and billions of people are wanting to use blockchain technology. So my question, Dani, is, assuming we get billions of people wanting to use blockchain, can this technology handle all of the traffic? 30 seconds for you.
Near protocol is spread across the globe, handling millions and millions of different sharding chains, ready to take on anyone's adventure.
Okay, so thank you. What about the industry more generally beyond your project?
It can. Essentially, every enterprise could have their own shard, or every dApp could have their own shard, and it could, in theory, scale infinitely. So that's super cool. And it, Near is ready for developers and people when they are.
Amazing. I didn't even need to show Bagel there. Thank you very much. Luigi, over to you. 30 seconds. Can blockchain handle billions of users?
Yeah, for sure. I think it's all about the trade-offs that you want to make in order to handle those billions of users. But Avalanche, just to show right now, is already handling a good amount of users and transactions, and it's already scaled through 2 new subnets that have launched, which are application-specific blockchains. I think you'll see millions of those, right? And doing that in a way where we have actually distribution of validators, so that there is security of the network. People are going to care about that one day, and they only care until they care. So I think with all these chains here and layer 2s, we'll be good.
Thank you. So that's brilliant. Thank you very, very much, Luigi. Sammy, over to you. 30 seconds.
Yeah, sure. So I think we're going to have, in this world where there's going to be billions of users, a network of networks, but multiple base settlement layers. So I think there's not going to be the possibility to have one that's going to be able to support large number of users. We already see that today. So we'll have a network of networks and multiple base settlement layers. And some of those we're starting to see emerge today. And we'll see a number of new types of architecture, chain architectures that are really required. There's a lot of great work happening in the L2 space, and application chains for sure are going to be a very key part of how scalability is going to be achieved. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Sammy. I really appreciate it. I'm sorry to rush you. I just want to make sure that we get Michael in. Michael, you've got 30 seconds exactly.
So you're gonna see the technology scale to as much as like the size of the internet, right? And you're going to see a lot of different use cases on blockchains. You're going to see a lot more people using DeFi, engaging in NFTs, but also engaging in other use cases, such as supply chain management and P2P insurance, which I think is an idea that really hasn't been explored at the moment, but is a very powerful use case. And so you're just going to see a lot more people interacting with each other in the P2P manner.
Fantastic. Guys, this has been an absolute pleasure. Sammy, Luigi, Michael, Dani, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. There's another panel on track 2 in half an hour about entertainment entering the metaverse. Stay with us. This is CoinMarketCap's The Capital Conference. Thank you all.